Thanks for coming today. It's delightful to see everybody here and on a busy weekend in preparation for the high holidays to have you devote some of your time to spend with us today. Our purpose here is to talk about text and translation discoveries inside of the Kiselgof-Makonovetsky digital manuscript project. And since I am not the expert in that part of the work, I'm going to turn us over immediately to Reuven Zaslavskyi and Hannah Ochner, who have been holding biweekly translation sessions for at least a year, and if not a little bit more. And they're going to be presenting to us, and they're going to be starting the conversation. As far as how it's going to work today, I think Hannah has prepared some slides, and she's going to be sharing them with us. But like most of our Klezmer Institute and Kiselhof project events, if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand or wave your hand in your thing or put something in the chat, and we'll try to monitor that and get those questions to the speakers so that we can address them as they come up. And that's the housekeeping. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Reuven first to introduce himself and say a couple of words about how he knows all of these languages that we find in our Kiselhof manuscripts.
Okay, thank you. We just went through this a couple minutes before. So I was born in southern Ukraine, in the city of Nikolaev, now known as Mykolaiv. So Russian is my native language. My family spoke Russian, and because it's a predominantly Russian-speaking territory, when I started learning English and Ukrainian in school, English from the first grade and Ukrainian from the second, but I was exposed to Ukrainian before, and there is still some Ukrainian, I think, in these manuscripts. Very little, but there is. Then my interest, I can't say I know Yiddish above elementary level, but at least I can read, and that helps in this work. So one of my relatives, of senior generation, he tried to introduce me, and he was a Yiddish enthusiast back in Soviet times in the 1980s, and he tried to introduce me and my second cousin to Yiddish. Some of that stayed with me, but I think my real interest to Yiddish and Klezmer, they came together in the early 2000s, and then that's stayed with me. And yeah, I'm passing the mic to Hannah, and she'll start her presentation afterwards.
Hi. So, my native language is German, which is to some extent helpful with Yiddish, of course. But when I started playing klezmer music in around 2014, I also was fascinated by the Yiddish language immediately. And then at the time I was studying at the University of Munich, and there you can also learn Yiddish. And then for about 4 or 5 years I took Yiddish classes there, so this is how I know the language. I don't really speak Russian. I learned to read it a bit in this project here. Yeah, I mainly can read the international words and not so this is mainly Reuven's area of expertise. But yeah, I think I can just start and show you a few things that we put together, and Reuven also later has some more slides about Russian stuff. And yeah, let's see, and yeah, just interrupt if you have questions or comments or anything like that. Okay, so let's start with what kind of text we have in KMDMP at all. So of course we have tune titles in both Yiddish and Russian, maybe sometimes in Ukrainian, but mainly these two. we have quite a bit of information about informants, regions of collection. This is also what is in the catalog, but I'll show you a few examples later. Some of it is on top of the pages as well. We've got like musical markings like tempo. Sometimes when the note names are unclear, they're written, there are corrections of notes. There we also get quite a bit of Russian, I would say, or even things in Latin letters, because it's more, music terminology, I would say. We get additional bits of text with information about the tunes or the context. This is mainly Makonovetsky, and this is mainly what I will discuss at least later. Of course, we sometimes get song texts. We will not really talk about this today, I think, because there are not so many, and in the translation group so far, we haven't focused on that a lot. So our main focus so far has been on transliterating and translating the Makonovetsky comments, and we have finished that before our summer break, so this will be what we'll mainly talk about today. And then we get notes that were definitely added later by the ethnographic team. Sometimes it's again the same information as in the catalog. Sometimes it says it denotes the corresponding recording, so it says which cylinder is on. Sometimes it says on where it should be transposed to, and these kind of things. So yeah, I would say these are the main categories of text that we get within the KMDMP. And before I would like turn to Makonovetsky, here 2 examples of how of these first few categories. So I think this is actually quite a few of these categories. I would say this is what some of the ethnographers wrote, because this is from the first heft, and I think these are transcriptions from the cylinder. So here we've got the title of the tune, the informant, and where on which cylinder it is. So, and here as well, here it even says clarinet. It says the informant and the place where it was collected as well. And here, as you can see, in Latin letters it says allegretto, so they wrote the tempo marking there too. Yeah, but so this would be a few of these very general categories of title, informant, recording, and like additional ethnographic comments. Yeah, you have any questions so far to that? Otherwise, I would say we can directly go to the most interesting pieces of text that we have in this collection, which is the Makonovetsky manuscript. And for those who are not familiar with this, I think all of you are probably, we have, I think, how many is it? Like 200 and something tunes, and most of these tunes have, I mean, they definitely, almost all of them have a title, and many of them have at least short further information, either about type of tune, or we get a lot of what I call here wedding customs or proceedings. So I will show a few examples in a minute. This is about like when this tune is played in the wedding and what kind of things are happening around the time when this tune is played. We get quite a few dance descriptions, mainly of dances, like not like the general dance like Frelas, but more choreographed dances, like very specific kind of things. Then we get a few comments about like sekund, about instrumentation, not genre, like about, for example, what Makonovetsky's definition of a Ochner is. I will show you later. And then he does some more general comments, I call it on circumstances. I will show you at the very end, where he also talks about his circumstances in writing these things down. Okay. And yeah, what I did is I prepared a few examples of these categories, and I would just show them to you, and we can discuss. And some of them also, of course, there's ambiguity in the translation, because if you haven't seen it yet, you will see you will see that Makonovetsky has a very idiosyncratic style of writing. There's a question in the chat about Sekund. Okay, Christina answered it. Yeah, Sekund is like string accompaniment, basically. But when we get there, we can discuss it. Okay. So here again, let's start with some easy examples. This is the example I'll show on this slide. Examples where we have a title with like a small piece of information. So here, I always show you the original and our transliteration and translation. So this says a reiche Dobronoc Herre 100 year old. So this is the translation that we came up with. A rich Dobronoc that is already more than 100 years old. Yeah, it's so the slightly ambiguous thing here is I think can we discuss this? I think reich, like rich, here might refer to that you play it for rich or well-to-do guests, but of course it could also just refer to the quality of the tune. And we've got quite a lot of these types of descriptions. So here we have another Dobronoc, a Dobronoc mit Spielfall Kreuzen Gasten Ruten. So this is a Dobronoc that is played for an important guest or in-law. Or here we have a Dobronoc for Balebatische Gassen. So again, one that's played at a wedding of wealthy people. And on the other hand, we don't only have the ones for the people with more money. We also have something here, an Orima Gemeine Dobronoc, so which says the translation would be like a poor, ordinary Dobronoc, and we think this probably means it's a simple tune that is played at a wedding where the bride and groom or the families do not have as much money.
Has anybody actually compared the complexity of Reicher Dobronoc and Oremer Dobronoc?
Well, I think it's for sure shorter. I mean, we would have to do like I think we only have the one Oremer and lots of Reicher ones. So,
if you share the numbers of them, we can totally do that. Offline afterwards. Like
yeah. I mean, that's sure we can. These are. I mean, as you can see, there's lots of things that from this alone, you'll see lots of things that can be follow-up research questions, both for the music and for the text. But yeah, of course, this is something we could do. But then, of course, the question is, of course, you can compare in terms of complexity, but on other levels, we have to come up with categories, what exactly to compare, I guess. Yeah, but I agree with Seth, this is the next stage and would be really interesting to do for sure. And yes, as Dan points out, you can search for these things in the spreadsheet, but I can also compile the numbers of the examples that I'm showing later. And then
well, and this is kind of the stage where we're at with our ontology development, is to develop, we're trying to figure out ways where we can be able to sort of display all of this information all together in one place that makes seeing the music and the text and all of those things like easier to find. I mean, that's a complex thing, but we are definitely starting on that journey to really hone in on how we do that right now with the archive project. So
okay, yeah, absolutely. There's lots to do. So this is the first step, when we have transliterated and translated it, and then there will be many next steps, both in terms of the project, as Christina mentioned, to like put everything together, find it, and then also to look for specific questions and compare also the music, compare the writing in different places, and so on. Okay, so there's more in examples in this character, but not necessarily just Dobronoc. So here we have Heiliger Freilachs zum Herren nicht tanzen, which is, so it's a Freilachs for listening, or it's a holy Freilachs for listening, not for dancing, which is quite interesting because usually we think of Freilachs as a dance tune. So here we explicitly have something where Makonovetsky says this is not for dancing, this is for listening. Here we have one. Es ist der Freilachs spielt mit Fachgute jeden Tzadikim sehr langsam und sie gehen in Tanzen verklärt in Heiligkeit. So we translated this as this Freilachs is played for good people, pious people, very slowly, and they go dancing absorbed in thoughts of piety. So quite interesting that he has several of these tunes that, I mean, here they are dancing in a way. I would imagine that's kind of a maybe solo hustle kind of way, like the way that Zeph, for example, does that, but it's not specified how exactly they dance, except that they dance slowly, but that's what I would imagine here. Yeah, and we also get comments like this one here, where he talks about that a specific tune is played here for the so it's a waltz. I'll just read the English because otherwise it takes very long to read everything. So here he says, additionally, I sent you a waltz which we used to play for rich or well-to-do people and aristocratic Jews, which is quite an interesting expression. We're not entirely sure what that means. Probably Jews like rich and I don't know, like Jews that are higher in society. And he says it's a very good waltz for listening with variations. And then he also says where he got this tune from. He says this tune has been given to me by a Klezmer from Warsaw in 1880, and he doesn't know who composed it. So he often gives us this kinds of comments where he says, although he doesn't know who the original composer is, where he learned it from. So this is quite interesting in terms of, so for us, I would say this is quite interesting to also
so
yeah.
Hannah, can I interrupt for just 1 second to make a comment about the previous tune?
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you who know Beregovsky, the tune to which this comment refers it is notated in Beregovsky, but it is listed as a Gassennigen. And it's the one that goes yum ba da 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 dum ya da 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 dum ba da 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 dum. I know, Zev, you and I have talked about this tune quite a lot over the years, and it was a huge discovery to see that this is what we find in sort of this original space, and that what Makonovetsky describes seems to be somehow at odds with the way that Makonovetsky or that Beregovsky categorizes it. So that's like another avenue of discovery and discussion that I think we'll be having as we work with this material. But
yes,
sorry,
I mean this is an interesting thing in general, because when I compare sometimes the tunes that Beregovsky has, and he does write it's Makonovetsky, and it is clearly from that source, but sometimes he changed some small things also in the music, and also the titles are not always the same. So I guess Beregovsky had some process of interpretation, and with some things he went with what Makonovetsky said, and with others he didn't. And I think, I mean, the most of the music things, it's more like, yeah, it's not huge differences. It's some notes are different, and mostly it's the phrasing that he changed. But I think he definitely edited it to a certain extent. So this could be part of that category. But of course, we don't know why or on what basis he did that. Yeah. So I'm just looking at the chat. Okay, so first of all, yes, Pritzim, I agree with Seth. I would also say it's non-Jewish aristocrats, but to say aristocratic Jews is quite interesting, because like what we think of aristocratic, I don't think there were Jews that were actual aristocrats in that sense, but maybe I'm wrong.
Actually, there were. I'm
There were?
not
Okay.
sure in Poland, but there were at least few Jews, very wealthy Jews, who got the aristocratic titles in Russian Empire. There was a famous, how we call it, philanthropist, Baron Ginsburg. He was from, I would say, probably Lita territory, but not from Ukraine. But there were a few very rich merchants who acquired aristocratic titles in Russian Empire.
Yeah, okay.
There was also in Poland too, maybe less well known, but probably there were.
Yeah. I mean, I would have thought that it still would include very wealthy Jews because there wouldn't be so many, but yeah, maybe this is yeah.
There won't be poor aristocratic Jews.
Yeah, yeah, okay. But yeah, okay, yeah, you're probably right. There's some that were actually aristocratic, but I would think that it would include people without a title, but quite wealthy. Yeah. Okay, I think Christina and Dan have to. Do you want to say something about that again, or sorry?
Sure. I'll look up the number in Berezovsky so people can see what I'm referring to, and maybe we can. I'll look up what is the MAC number on this one. But I just remember I was reading through Berezovsky and playing all the tunes, and I kind of stopped in my tracks at this one when I found it in Berezovsky, and over several years I tried to interpret it in a bunch of different ways, and because it had the category, it was in the title of Gassenigen, or given the category of Gassenigen, I tried to play it like kind of as a walking tune, you know, something that you would play on the street, and it was always a little kooky and wonky. And then eventually I started playing it with a Turkischer rhythm and kind of slowing it down a little bit, because it does have this very it's a weird tune, and I love it. But it's very unusual. And then I asked Zev, of course, and Zev gave me kind of a permission slip to perform it that way. But this instruction really kind of gives a much different kind of permission slip for how we can interpret this piece, basically. And I think that Dan, on that cymbal, this would be an extraordinary piece to play on that cymbal, you know. So.
Okay. Yeah. Great.
And now we can look forward to playing this for Zev to dance to as a gute jeden tzaddik.
Exactly. Yeah.
Tzaddik of dance, that he can be dancing verklärt in Heiligkeit. I can't wait.
Okay, good. And then there was Bob asked what years was Makonovetsky active, and I don't know when he started. I mean, he does refer to the 1880s several times, so I guess he was playing then already. And he wrote this down for Berezovsky. It's dated 1938, and I think by that time at the time he wouldn't play a lot as a traditional klezmer because of historical circumstances, but yeah, I guess he was active until the time when there wasn't much happening. Yeah, so I guess he probably started. So Dan says he was born in 1872, but yeah, he does speak about the 1880s sometimes. So maybe he got these things later and he knew that it was from that time, but yeah, he would have just started around that time, I guess. Okay, good, so we can maybe continue. So, yeah, here's another comment of Makonovetsky that refers more to his process of like preserving this and writing this down. So here he says, so this is above like a concerto, like a longer form piece, and he said, I copied this concerto from very old notes as it was written there. I'm writing them as well. And if some bars are wrong, I will correct them. And we think he probably means that he did correct the ambiguous wrong bars in the source material. This is one of the examples. We can read the Yiddish together for those people who speak Yiddish, where it's slightly ambiguous from the sentence what he means. But so he says, dem Konzert habe ich geschrieben von stark alten Noten, which is quite clear. Sei wie dort ist geschrieben, sei schreibe ich euch. So I think that's quite clear. And then he says, und wenn einige Takten seien nicht richtig, will ich popraven. So yeah, so we think what he means is he had this old sheet music from somewhere. It was probably not in the best condition at the time when he wrote it, and he did make his own corrections there. But yeah, these comments, I find them also quite interesting, just to see where he got his information from and how he dealt with it. Okay. So I think from there I would turn to discussing more things that he talks about that are more in the direction of like wedding customs, things that like which tune is performed when, and at times he has like there's several tunes in a row and they all come after one another, and there's a whole story of what's happening. So if you have other comments on what we discussed beforehand, we can discuss it now or at any time. So if you think of something else, we can of course do it later. So here, this is a very short one, but one where we in the translation group took us a while to understand what it may mean. So it says, das ist auf morgen noch der Hupe zu dem Schleier. So, which means this is happening, or the tune is played in the morning after the Hupe to the veil. And then we will puzzled a bit because the veil is usually before the Hupe, and what does it mean? And after quite a bit of discussion, we thought that what this could mean is, or refer to as, something called the Schleier Warmes, so the Schleier lunch, a meal, which is referenced in this Ansky questionnaire that that they had as part of these expeditions, and I think Greg Ullman found this, so I should give credit to him. And one of these questions in this questionnaire says, describe how the reception known as the veil lunch, Schleier Warmes, takes place at the home of the bride. And also in this questionnaire, it seems that from this context that it should be on the day after the wedding. And so we'll have an example later where we come back to this Schleier. So I think this is what this after discussion we think that this is what it refers to. And yeah, I thought it was quite interesting because at least I personally didn't know before that there was a thing called Schleier Warmes on the day after the Huppe. So it does come nicely together from the different sources. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. And talking about Schleier now, although this is I think later in the manuscript, now we have a really long section. This is basically the Caliber-Decken, and then also later also involves the Rossen. So here we have several passages that put up here, and they are put the Yiddish here and the English here. And it's basically, yeah, it describes various stages in the process of Caliber-Decken. Starting from, so this is chronological now. So it starts, and he says, all aunts with the cousins and older people dance for the veiling of the bride. And they dance with the bride holding hands. And here from the context, it's clear that this is all women, I would say. So the women dance with the bride for the protection. And then for the next tune, this is in one tune. For the next tune, he basically says, afterwards the bride is in the middle, and one dancer frelachs karahot around her. And on the side of this tune, he makes another comment. He says that this is a certain historic dance, which has this Hebrew name here, which in translation means how you dance in front of the bride. So the from his presentation makes clear that there's several steps in this process, and there's a different tune for each of them. And then as a next step, she is actually seated, Besetzen, I guess. So she sits down on a chair, and here, I mean, if one of you can read that, I would be interested. So it's this last word here. We think there's something missing, so we don't really know what's happening. But she's seated, and around her mother and all her good friends, and especially her female friends. So again, it's with the women. So they are with her. Yeah. If I can also point out the page later, if one of you has an idea of what this word could be in the end, we would be happy, because we didn't figure it out yet. But yeah, so with this, however, we're not done yet with the Besetzen. So now the Batchen comes into the whole thing. So I put this in, this is not so interesting translation-wise, because just the Batchen sagt Musiker einfach, so the Batchen says something or thinks something, and the music, the band answers. But it's quite nice because he wrote it out musically here. So basically the Batchen does something, then the musicians play the chord, and he does something, they play. So for us as musicians, this is quite nice to see that he actually writes it out in exactly the way that you would imagine. Yeah, and now we had the Badecken, but now the Chossen comes into the whole thing. So now, of course, every time I have a new section, there will also be another tune. So he then says, after that, the band goes after the Chossen to cover the bride with a cloth or veil, which the Shamish of the Shul takes from the Paroches, which is the curtain of the Torah scroll or art. So this we also found quite interesting, because yeah, we weren't sure whether this is a general custom or whether this is a very specific thing here, but he describes it in that way. And then we go to the next tune, with which the band now leads the groom to the bride for the Badecken. And then following that, the seating of the groom takes place in the same way as it has been done for the bride. And then he says, after that, they are led to the wedding canopy with a march. So yeah, we get at least 3 or 4 tunes here for all the different steps. And then following that, there will be the Zudergruppe, basically. Okay. Yeah. So here, we still continue with the same story. Here it says, afterwards, when one leads the Chossen, one walks towards the Kalle and plays a galop with a lot of noise. I put it in because it's very nice. This is Kreuzrasch, so he really, often with Makonovetsky you get this really funny, or I don't think he tries to be funny, but if you read it, it has these nice little details that are really nice to see in that. Yeah, so at this point we are now at the Gruppe, and then for some reason, I think this is almost the next tune, he kind of jumps to after that and says, "Ne viertem Chossen auf der Wetschere mit den Retonen." So now we lead the groom to the meal with the in-laws. So I think he has this really nice chronological bits where really each tune follows the other in the wedding procedurals, and then sometimes he also jumps to something else. So I'm not entirely sure why he does that, or whether in between it would I don't know, it's the tunes are clear and he doesn't write them down, or what's happening there. But yeah, this is another question that could be would be really interesting, I think, to really go through, find all the bits that go together and see where is something missing, or where do we not like really go chronologically, or where or do some kinds of tunes appear later again. Just right. Could of course be that he forgot something to write down in the first place, and then he wrote it later somewhere.
This is a whole long weekend. This is a whole long weekend workshop of putting together Makonovetsky's
more than a weekend,
wedding.
I'm sure, but yeah.
Well, but that would be, we could do it once a year for a while and put through. We could do a rich person wedding. We could do the poor person wedding. We can do all. So many ways to. I mean, just being able to hear all of the pieces sort of performed with moving from place to place. Just a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of questions. Also, I mean, I think we have some example of it, but that there's lots of these really long form pieces, like concerto-like things, and of course, I'm sure they performed several of those for like the important guests in a wedding, but I'm quite sure not all of the ones that he wrote down would be performed in a single wedding, or maybe if the wedding's a week long, then he could fit them in. But yeah, I think of course there's some also, not just the rich and the poor and the different types of wedding, but there's probably some tunes that there's some more instances of tunes than you actually need for one wedding, probably.
Well, sure, you can't go around. I mean, it's like you can't wear the same dress. You have different tunes. If your repertoire is only playing the same tunes over and over, people won't hire you after a while, because they're like, "Oh, I heard that at Shlomo's wedding 2 weeks ago. Who is this guy?" Right? You'd have to have like lots of fancy pieces to play for fancy people, or people.
He definitely has lots of fancy pieces for fancy people. Okay. Yeah. So at this point, I think now we are after the Gruppe, but again, he has like a long chunk of text that goes consecutively. So here he says, "Ach, they lead the groom to the room where the meal is happening, I guess. They make way for him with a vivat. The band plays very loudly. Baraban, which is a type of drum, plays a drum roll, and all the musicians play a tremolo." I like that bit because it's so specific as to how the people what the band has to do in this specific instance. Good.
And sort of shockingly like what you do today. I mean, it's like this is the same basic custom. Like when the groom or the groom and the bride enter at a wedding today, the MC will stop the action and say, "Drum roll, please." I mean, this now we wait for the pause for the entering of Mr. and Mrs. so and so. It'll be a little bit different, but it's the same basic idea.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Okay, yes, that's what's happening. Yeah. And as I said, this now is again a consecutive thing. So he says, "And one goes to the tables and is seated to eat the meal, and the band plays each guest a dobra noc, a small one for the ordinary person and a big one for the rich person." So again, we have this thing that we distinguish between the guests and in terms of which tune you play for them. So I guess a small and big, he means longer and shorter form pieces, although I would say most of the pieces that he actually writes down are almost a page long. Of course, there are these concertos that are like 3-4 pages long, but so not sure what how small a small one is here, but yeah, maybe he didn't write down as many of them. And then he says, which I also found quite interesting, afterwards everybody gets a dobra noc, so not just the in-laws or something. So also the neighbors and good friends, and they get the smaller, shorter
May I
voice.
ask a question, maybe specifically Zeev, about his last comment? I don't remember. I may have seen something, but you surely know this better. Were there any tunes that were named by the persons who ordered them to be composed? Something like that. Wasn't there practice?
Okay, am I unmuted?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Actually, I'm trying to think of if I've heard of such a thing with a name. It's not impossible, but I can't.
Maybe it's false memory.
No, it's not impossible, because I think Stuchevsky may have mentioned that too, that requesting tunes from the Better Klezmer could be. But I'm not sure if, I'm trying to remember if Mr. Heschel has ever said such a thing. I'd have to go back over the interviews with him. But again, a tune with a name of the patron.
Mhm.
No, I mean it's. I don't think the name would stick. Put it this way: like, after a couple of decades, they might very well forget. Yeah, and remember that the tunes that were composed by a particular capella were kept as the property of that capella during the lifetime of the Kapellmeister. Nobody would dare play those tunes while he was still around. And then, afterwards they become common knowledge. So it's quite possible that things would become confused that way. If you had a student of a famous musician like a Peduzzer, then of course, then certain things might stick at least with the composer's name, but not with the patron's name.
Thank you.
Okay.
It also just seems like if these kinds of pieces existed, we would know about them. Like we would have seen more evidence of a piece, like because we have in classical music, such and such concerto composed in honor of such and such a person. And we don't, Zev will
Well,
search his memory more, but we don't have those kinds of things.
no, I'm saying that the name wouldn't have stuck anyway.
Mm.
There were such pieces composed for patrons, for sure.
Right, but we don't have the name attached. That's
No,
what.
because I'm trying to, either Beregovsky or Stuchevsky mentioned specifically that sometimes the new tunes would be demanded or requested in the contract with the Kapellmeister for the wedding. So it was a known thing in a better capella, where there was a Kapellmeister who was known as a composer. The host might request him. I would like a new Dobre Dutch or a new Dobre Zen or a new something. For this wedding.
Well, and anyway, if you wanted to reuse that piece after you made it, you wouldn't want to have, and you wanted to play it for some other guest. You wouldn't want
Exactly.
to say, well, okay, so this was composed for this other guy who paid me for it, but I'm going to play it for you because,
Right.
like that is just not you're not going to do that.
That's a good point. Because the host didn't say you could play it for me and then forget it.
Right.
No.
Carry on.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we're in the process of playing Doppler notches and vivats for lots of people here in this part of the wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes on a bit, although
Sure.
in between, I don't know. I mean, this is that's what he says at least. So we have all these vivats, and he says afterwards one announces the Droschengeschenk, which is wedding present kind of thing, and one says grace after the meal, and one recites the Schöpfbruch. And then he says the guests, or everyone, leaves the tables, and the in-laws and family together with the groom remain seated. And then the vivats are called out. So an in-law for another in-law, and the bride for the father-in-law, and the bride and groom for the parents, and so on. So And then he also says, and for this honor, money is given, which goes to the Klezmer. And whoever gives money brings or toasts l'chaim with the in-laws. So I find it also quite interesting that he often comments on at which points in the process the Klezmorim get money or make money. This is, of course, quite relevant from his perspective, I guess. But he does, I mean, there will be an example, at least, I think 2 more examples, even in the ones that I compiled later. So that's I find it quite interesting to also see that component.
Is a money gift a custom in a Jewish wedding of this period? And if so, when is the money, if it is given, when is it given? Is it afterwards at the feast some other time? Do we know? I'm sure you know, Zev, so I'm asking you.
I'm sorry, given to whom?
To the bridal couple.
This I haven't seen.
Uh-huh.
No.
Are gifts of items or objects given to the bridal
People
couple in the Jewish
pledge.
wedding? They pledge.
They're going to give. They're going to give.
Going
usually.
to give things or money?
Things or money.
Things or
Whichever.
money.
Things, whatever. Yeah. And the idea is that you pledge that you will do this. You say that you will do it.
But you do that at the feast itself, the pledging of.
Apparently that's how it was. Now, as far as by the way, money to the Klezmorim, this is also an interesting little detail, because in really wealthy weddings, the idea was that the Kapellmeister would get a large fee, and and he would distribute that very unequally to the Capellia. But in the poorer weddings, there was no large fee, and the guests paid for the dances that they requested. So I think already with who am I thinking? With Lipayev, he already mentions that. And I think Struchevsky mentions it as well, and of course my teacher, Mr. Heschel, has mentioned it at times. And this is the kind of thing Beregovsky himself would not want to talk about, because to build up the Klezmer as the proletarian Jewish hero, he doesn't want to know about these differences of economic status and how it affected the Klezmer.
I mean, there is later, I'll have it in there is something where again it says people pay differently depending on how much money they have, and also there's something where it says you can request dances and then they pay for it. So like similar what you said. So I think like in what Makonovetsky describes, there's different levels of. I think he never says something about a big fee that is then distributed. I mean, this might still have happened, but he mentions more like a specific dance where at each like round that is paid and these kind of things. So because like more situationally, but yeah, sure. I think all the things that I've mentioned are to some level there in Makonovetsky.
Isn't that pledge for presents this drosha geschenk that mentioned this passage?
Yeah, and again, sometimes if there are actual things that might even be held up and and pointed to. This
Okay.
Actually, this is the kind of thing that if you search in the memoir literature in Yiddish, these things come up sometimes. That's another study. I mean, Mila Sholochovich is going to be publishing a very fine article that she'd written already 10 years ago about wedding song customs, and before the wedding and after the wedding, and so forth. And it's almost entirely coming from Yiddish memoir literature of the 19th century.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it would be interesting to compare.
Sure.
With other sources, what we have here and what the other.
Yeah, because those things, again, the specific things about all the dances and Mazel Tovs, most people who are not musicians wouldn't be so expert in that, but gifts they might remember.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're not done with the vivat, so he describes that in even more detail. So that's it all has to go in order. So the first vivat is in honor of the father of the bride, and so he sits down at the table, and then the following is called out, like yamoit, 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 which means like rice.
Yamot.
So they calling out to the in-law, to the father of the bride, to dance the polonaise with the bride, and then he sits down again, and they play this vivat referring to the tune that's written below it. Yeah, and then they have this really long passage, which is this is the continuation of that one. Sorry. Yeah. I can, if you want, I can read it all out, or you can read it as well. So basically, yeah. It says, in this way, one plays for whoever is called out. So again, a vivat, and each person gives money, some more, some less. So exactly what we just discussed. And when this vivat honor ends, the musician who does the calling, the patron, takes the money and gives it to the fiddler. Also, I guess the fiddler is the leader of the band in this case. So yeah, and the patron, I think this happens before. The patron calls out the father of the bride to dance with the bride, and if the free space becomes available, so they dance polonaise, and this is also an interesting passage. And everybody wishes him that he should. So we interpret it as that he should live long enough to experience this with all his children. So what it says in Yiddish is, "In alle wünschen ihm, Ort sei soll der leben bei alle Kinder." So we think it means, he should be able to have such a wedding for all his children.
Sure.
And then, of course, other people dance. So the father of the groom dances with the bride, and so on. And after the polonaise, the relach is played. And now I think this is also interesting, because now it says the whole community, all the guests, get up to join the dance, and they regard this dance as a mitzvah dance because it's called a kosher dance. And he kind of repeats himself here. He says afterwards there's a fella, and everyone dances the fellas together. And the in-law who was dancing with the bride is at the center of the circle with the bride. And now here is the thing we also just talked about. Afterwards, perhaps they follow dances for whoever wants, and which they want, and for which everybody will pay. So I guess this means now you can request that you want a relachs or whatever, shock or something, and then you have to pay accordingly. So that's basically what we just also discussed. Yeah.
So maybe we're learning that Mr. Makonovetsky was not playing for those fancy schmancy weddings where he just got paid a lump sum, because he's describing this way of, pay to play sort of situation.
Well, I guess he might have done both, because he has lots of these really fancy tunes. But yeah, from this it sounds it's more like the.
I mean, I'm happy for it, Bye, Gabriel. By the way, did he already leave? Thanks for coming.
I mean, also, I guess Makonovetsky was active from, let's say, the 1880s at some point to whenever it stopped, like 1920s. I don't know how long it actually went on. So he probably, like in different periods, different things might be more common, and people would have had more money or less, I guess. So it could be that it also depended on when and where he would be playing. And he wrote all of this, we guess, in 1938. So from the perspective of the end, let's say. So maybe this is he describes more of what happened in the later years there. I don't know. this is, of course, all of these factors could influence.
Yeah,
the
and it
outcome
almost
afterwards.
doesn't bear speculating at a certain point
Yeah,
because that's
exactly.
just
Yeah.
information that we just can't know for sure,
So, absolutely.
without
Yeah.
much more contextual additional information. So,
Yes,
Zev,
I'm really
because
interested in that question as well that Daniel just asked, because
Totally.
that could give us further information potentially.
Totally. Zev, I muted you because your keyboard was clacking. So if you're typing, if you would be so kind to mute yourself and then you can unmute yourself again. Dan Karkner, that is a great question. And if you, I mean, I wrote, so what he's talking about is that somebody, maybe it was you, Dan, it probably was you, Dan, that found a relative of Makonovetsky in Florida attending a music school. Do you want to talk about that, Dan? Was it you? I think he's going to say more, but I remember writing to her and I got an initial response about a
Sorry,
diary.
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was on the YouTube video of you in Weimar with Hannah and Abigail, I think. And you were talking about Makonovetsky. And then I was just watching the video because I wasn't in Weimar, obviously, last year. And I saw the comment, somebody saying, "Oh, this is cool. He was my great-grandfather." I forget what she said, right? And so I just looked, and her name is very clear, like it's under her real name. And then I looked on Facebook, and she has kind of her personal account, and she has kind of a violinist account or something, right? Like profile. And so I just sent it to you guys and said, "Oh, by the way, look at this person who commented on your video," because you don't always see YouTube comments these days. It doesn't notify you anymore. So and so at some point last year, Christina, you wrote to her, and I don't know what happened. And also when I heard that Joel Rubin is doing a project about Makonovetsky, I mentioned it to him, and he said he was going to try to write to her, but he never mentioned it again either. So it may be she never answered him either. That's it.
So Joel Rubin is now doing a Makonovetsky project. That's interesting. Cool.
Yeah, he is doing kind of recording project of some of it.
Here we go. All right, let's keep going. But yeah, I mean, so the answer that I have is that I wrote to her on Facebook and we did have a short exchange and then she sort of vanished. And I think it was to do, it was right around the time when the Ukraine war was starting. And so, I mean, who knows? But it might be worth it. And Daniel, just feel free to get in touch with her again if you want. I mean, why not?
Okay.
Can I, excuse me, can I just clear my throat enough to ask you a question? How unusual is this kind of description in the literature, as I guess mainly for Zev? I mean, is this extraordinary, or do we have many examples like this? I think Zev needs to unmute.
Zev, you need to unmute yourself before you start talking.
Oh, you have to do it, Christina. Or ask to unmute, that it opens up the permission.
Unmute.
There you go.
Now I'm unmuted. Yeah, this is very unusual. Actually, this level of specificity, at least in the manuscripts that are available, this is very unusual. So, and very likely, Makonovetsky was aware that Velikovsky would be interested in this level of detail. And also, he's writing this in the Soviet period when this kind of wedding was no longer so customary. So it's a mixture of some things he's probably still doing or had been doing till not that long ago, and then other things that go way back to before the Soviet Revolution. Yeah, it's very unusual. I certainly can't think of. I mean, something like Moshe Bik's article, from in Hebrew, from his interviews with the Kapellmeister in Orche in Bessarabia, and that has a lot of detail, of course, but it's a very small selection of items. It's very important. It's very, very, very good selection of items, but very much smaller and less detailed than this.
Helps with our sense of discovery.
Yeah, it's
I
great.
think also Makonovetsky was very interested in preserving that. So we'll get to that in the end. But also from how he writes about it, it seems that he really wants to give this to Bergovsky, and we don't know what he wrote in this questionnaire, because that would be very interesting to see as well, if it still exists and we ever find it. Because I guess not many people actually filled it out, but he seemed to be really, really wanting to talk about these things and to preserve them for Bergovsky and who came after for us, basically.
Sure.
So this is also why he writes in such detail, I guess.
Definitely. But by the way, it would be a desideratum to have a English translation of Stochevsky's chapter, Klezmorim b'chatuna, the Klezmorim in the wedding, because he summarizes a lot of interviews that he had done in Tel Aviv with Klezmorim, or former Klezmorim.
Sure, that sounds like a great idea. I have some further information to add to this discussion, which is that the young woman who Daniel identified as, her name is Biana Pinchuk, and she wrote, I myself don't know much about him. My mom and had my uncle find a book in Ukraine, I believe, and it had some of his manuscripts, but we were only able to get copies and they were not very legible. I actually wrote my college entrance paper about how he was a big inspiration for me to pursue music as my career. My mother's grandmother told her stories when she was younger of a man named Pedutzer, right? I believe who my great great grandfather collaborated with very often. We have a big copy of this book, parentheses, I think it was sort of like his diary from Ukraine back home, and I believe it contains some information about how much he was paid for different events, his life, etc. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So then I wrote back to her a bunch of stuff, and then I haven't heard from her, but I'll write to her again to follow up and say, to see, it's a year. I mean, that was literally on that exchange, by the way, happened literally on February 22nd and 23rd. So it's February 22nd and 23rd, or 23rd and 24th. So like obviously other things happened. So, but I'll try to see if I can revive that conversation. Thanks for the reminder, Daniel.
Where does she live?
I think in Florida, maybe.
Sure.
I mean, she's on Facebook. So she lives in Florida.
Yeah,
She's a
that would be really
very lovely
interesting.
violin player. Yeah. Yep. She has she's playing the Chrysler Recitativo and Scherzo on August 8th during the Bodowan International Music Festival. So, she's an up-and-coming violinist. Very much so.
Oh.
Sorry, I don't know how to say words in classical music, but I'll shut up.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think it would be interesting to see what they have, and maybe there's additional information somewhere. Yeah, okay. So now I think we jump a bit and we go back to the Schleier, which probably is this Schleier Warmes on the next day, because he always says zum Schleier in der Früh, so to the veil in the morning. So we think it probably refers to the next day. if it's Varemes, it's more like lunch rather than the morning. But who knows? Maybe they did it maybe in Makonovetsky's area they did in the morning. So yeah, I put this in because that's the Schleier again. So here he basically just says to the Vale in the morning, the Klezmer and Klezmer arrive and play Freilachs at the groom's house, and then the band stops playing. They go over to the bride's house and to get her to lead her over to the groom's place through the streets with the tune that's written there. And then again we go back to the question of money. So it says after that the bride is brought to the groom, and he bargains a golden dance for the bride. And here we have this Russian word, which we don't exactly know what it is. So maybe Reuven wants to say something about it. I just wrote unclear Russian word. You mention it later again, or do you want
I will mention it, but yeah.
Okay.
The thing is, I still don't know what it is.
Okay, good. So if anybody who speaks Russian wants to have a go at this one, Reuven, I can point you to it, or Reuven can will probably point it out later again. So yeah, there's some. I think we got most of it is well readable, and also we more or less figured out what it is. But there's a few words, as you can see, still where so far we haven't been able to resolve it. So people are interested in having a look at those. You're always welcome at Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern time every 2 weeks. We always meet, so people want to come join us. Okay, yeah, but anyway, so he says, okay, the bride is at the groom's house now. She's given a present, and the groom gives the Klezmer as much as they want, which is nice. Even a poor one gives 3. Maybe it's ruble, we don't know. And the rich one gives 5 or more. So he even gives numbers here. So I mean, he writes that in 1938. I don't know when the wedding would have been that he refers to, so it's not easy, I guess, to know how much it is today, but because I guess that would have been very different depending on if that was in the late 19th century or in the early 20th, so even in
for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, I think we discussed this mostly before, but it's interesting that he comes back to it and he even gives some kind of reference thing. Okay, so that was the section on like wedding customs and these kind of things. If you have questions to that, we can discuss it, or otherwise I would probably continue with like dance descriptions, like where he actually describes how a certain dance goes. So this is one of the funniest ones, I guess. We call it the musical chairs. So it's the Stocktanz. I think Seth mentions it in his book, and also I think even in Bergovsky thing it's mentioned. But here he gives like a very long description of it, and I mean it is similar to musical chairs, but it works slightly differently. So I'll just read out the English for you. So you start by seating 10 people on 10 benches, and then there's another person who has a stick, and he walks around the 10 people, and at some point hits his stick next to a person, and then this person has to get up and follow him around until all the 10 people are following him. And then once everybody has gotten up, he says one plays quickly. I think he refers to now the faster part of the tune happens. So it's a very simple tune, but it has kind of 2 parts, and the one is a bit slower and the one is a bit quicker. And when this happens, all 10 people follow him where he leads them like a commander, single file, and they have to follow him. And at some point then the person with the stick, he sits down on one of the chairs, and then everybody else also has to sit down. And this is my favorite bit. He says, and one has to remain because there are 11 people and 10 benches. Like, yeah, I love that he points that out explicitly again, as if it wouldn't be clear. And then what happens then, that the person who didn't get a seat, he now has to take the stick and start the whole thing again. And then in the end he also says, and that happens many times during this dance, and the musicians make a lot of money, because the person who loses, who has to take the stick, he has to pay the Klezmer. So again, an interesting detail. So, I mean, it's a really annoying tune to play over and over again, but I guess
the tune is extraordinarily. It is a really dumb tune. Like,
yeah,
I mean, and I'm a fan of dumb tunes, but it's like dum ba dum ba
yeah.
dum bum ba da dum bum ba da ya da da dum ba dum bum ba da dum bum ba da dum bum bum. That's the slow part,
Yeah.
and then the fast part is bum 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 ba da dum 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 da da dum ba da bum bum ba da ba dum. That's it.
Yeah, and he even has that same tune in the next heft, which is I think called for drei Paulere Tanz. So it's not even just specifically for this tune. It's just like a short, boring tune that could be repurposed. But yeah, well, I think it's really interesting to have this this quite exact description here, and also in how like that they play it often and that they get paid every time. I guess that makes up for it. Yeah. I mean, there's other dances like this, like the Schuster, where you kind of imitate like a shoemaker and these kind of things. He also describes them, but like very briefly only, or one where you imitate a drunk. So there seem to be several of these things where you do that. So here are two more examples that I found somewhat interesting. So this one is called a melnitze, so which is a mill in Russian, so Reuven tells me. And she says here, some people are lying on the ground and some are standing, and those who are standing take those who are on the ground by the hands and spin them around. I think this is a bit like what Steve Weintraub does for some of these show dances, where he has this plate in the middle and then people spin around. So it's quite interesting that some of it has survived through some channels, it seems. And then this one here is also rather interesting. We're not entirely sure how it works, but so here what she says is one ties a cloth into a ring. So he says Handtuch, which is like a towel actually, but well, it seems that it has to be quite a big one for this to work, at least in what you're using. And so he ties this cloth into a ring or into something, and many people hold on to it with one hand in the center. So far it makes some sense. And then he says people walk slowly, and as one person climbs onto it. It's a bit hard to read, and one spins him until he falls off. So not entirely sure how big this cloth is, but that's what we think it is here, which is yeah, somewhat interesting custom, I guess.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's a different way to interpret that, but yeah. But this last part is quite clear, so yeah. Slightly more obscure dances, but apparently they did them. And then, sorry?
I was going to say, is that in its way not unlike Steve Weintraub's maneuver with the plate and spinning people around?
The first one, yes, that's the one that as I said, this is what I think is exactly what Steve does. But the second one was the cloth or towel. Not so sure. I don't think Steve has one of those. Yeah, Steve has the one where he has the plate, and I think this is like that. And then Steve has another one where you kind of swing outwards. I think you don't, not lying down at the beginning. You're just holding the people in between, and then you and then they kind of swing outwards with their legs. But yeah, I think the first one is exactly what Steve does there. We should actually point that out there, and maybe he would appreciate that. Yeah, but the second one was I have not, at least not experienced something like that, but maybe someone does it somewhere.
And stayed alive.
Yeah, well, apparently. I guess if there's enough people around, you don't really fall very far. Okay. Yeah, and this one is kind of, we were talking about that already a little bit. So here he says, it's not really a dance. It's not really a dance description, but he just says, so it seems that Polonaise or Polish, as he calls them, were quite common as well. So that it's called Polish because it's a Polonaise, and kosher dance because this is what the bride dances with her father and father-in-law. And then he has this interesting commentary. Says, and she stays a wife to her groom during the wedding night and forever, which we found quite amusing as a comment to the dance. But yeah, yeah, I think we need to go on a bit because there's not so much time left. Yeah, so basically this is my last category before the Makonovetsky's final comment, which we can look at briefly. So it is like comments on performance. So here, like on how you would play tunes or like accompaniment or things like that. So here he says, this Wolof is played with one's own thoughts, ideas, and nature, and tempo and rhythm with Yiddish or Jewish, depending how you want to translate it, feeling. Therefore, there's nothing next to the clef at the beginning, so he means there's no time signature, because the second violin and the bass sustain the indicated notes of the chord as pure fermata. So we thought that was quite interesting as a general comment of how much freedom the performers basically had.
Couldn't be more clear what he's saying, you know.
Yeah. But usually I have not often seen comments like that, and no, he's not. It's not a Doiner per se. It's like, I mean, the first part is a bit Doiner-like, but I think it starts as a bit freer, but then it also goes into rhythm. So I think I don't know, it's similar to a Doiner in a way, but I don't think he ever uses the word Doiner, by the way. So it might just be a conceptual.
To it. He seems like he calls it a Wolof.
Yeah, he does.
He's a Wolof, right?
Yeah.
He calls it a Wolof. So you know, is it Doiner-like? Maybe. You know, is it free rhythm?
To a certain extent, not quite as we play a Doiner today, but yeah. But he calls Wolof. He calls a lot of these things that are like longer form pieces for the table. This is one of them as well. Yeah. But yeah, it's whether we call it a Doiner or not, it's interesting to make clear the role of the instrumentalist or the violinist.
Yeah, just to make a comment that this word Wolof had different meanings in different regions of Eastern Europe for the Klezmer. So that's why I'm asking. In much of in Galicia and also parts of Belarus, Wolof was a dobry dzień.
Yeah.
By the end of the 19th century, they were using this word Wolof. We found it in Kiselgof, and also Mr. Herschlos would use that as the standard word. He never used dobry dzień. But in other places, Wolof could mean a Doiner-like thing. So I'm just curious, what is the what is the rhythmic basis?
Well, he uses it more in the sense of it can have like a bit rubato elements like Doiner, but then in the full form is usually a longer form that then might later go into a rhythm as well. So I think
which rhythm? Which rhythm?
It can be both. It can go in 3, like in a hora kind of thing, or it can go into 2.
Mm-hmm.
And he quite often has something called Wolof zum Tisch. So it's for it's like Yeah.
Hmm.
And some of the Wallachs don't have the Doina part as well. They have like or at least they have a time signature from the beginning on. Whereas others have this part where it's either without time signature or with time signature, but with really different bar lengths, which I would say is then meant as a freer thing. So I think he's on neither of he's neither Doina nor Doppelganger, so maybe a mixture of
Yeah,
both.
well, the term had many meanings.
Yeah,
for sure. And it's very, very frustrating because it first appears in Lipayev, but he never describes what he means by it. He mentions the Wallach, but we don't know exactly what he meant by it there.
Yeah,
okay.
But that's what he says here. And with the other Wallachs, he doesn't comment like that. He just calls it a Wallach. And the other thing where we have a similar idea, he talks about a waltz and a mazurka. So here, one of Christina's favorites here. So he says, this waltz is to be played according to its character. So everybody understands where to go out of strict time, where to speed up, where to play softly, and where to become stronger. And then there's it because and in the same way, the mazurka is also played naturally as one understands it. So the idea is the same. You know how to deal with it, and then you do it musically. Although I guess, of course, in the waltz you wouldn't go completely rubato, but in like more micro expression and tempo wise. Yeah. Okay. Then quickly on the here now we come to the question of accompaniment in second. So here, I mean, this is not the pure second here, but here he talks about second violin, which is basically second. So here he says the theme is played by the second violin, the first plays the variation, and the second time around as well. But the way he then notates the music, it is clear that there's some kind of accompaniment happening in the second violin, sometimes just chords and sometimes also rhythmic stuff. So he does not talk a lot about second, like string accompaniment, but he mentions it like at times. And he makes mention of these kind of things. And then another thing, this is more about genre than about performance. On our favorite question about Scotchness, so Makonovetsky has a definition. Of course, there are many others, but he says Klezmer color tunes a Ochner, which includes technical etudes, and every artist has shown great technique in Scotchness, diligently learned in etudes. And a simple tune of the same kind is called a Frelas or Carahol. So he goes with the definition of a Ochner being the somewhat more elaborate Frelas tune, but yeah, I think this is just one of the many ones that we could have. Okay, so to give Reuven some time to also talk about Russian things, I would maybe skip this next. Yeah, I think Seth of course knows this quote, but as Seth gave a really long talk about Ochner at some point last year, we all know that this is not all there is to Ochner. Yeah, I mean this next bit here is quite interesting, but I think we should skip over the details. There's this piece in Makonovetsky 5, which is called the Kiever Pogrom, and it's a really long form piece. It goes on for like 10 pages or so, which he learned from somebody in Kiev, who actually, like a teacher of his, who actually, he says he learned it in 1886 from this person. And it is a piece about this Kiev pogrom. We're not entirely sure. Which one? I mean, it must be there like in the early 1880s. And the interesting thing about this piece is that it has this long section on the beginning where this is described, and it kind of in the music there's periodically little phrases where you say at this point that's happening in the like now there's the pogromchiks doing that, and the Jews are crying and all these things. So it's kind of I don't know what you would call this classically, but some kind of like program music rather than just I think we should skip over it for now, but it's really interesting as a piece to look at, and it's unique in this whole Makonovetsky thing, I would say.
This sounds like it's really just a concert, like it's definitely like a concert performance piece.
It is like concert performance, but it's not a concerto. It's like because it has these bits, yeah, where it's like a musical narration. So it narrates the story of this pogrom. It doesn't have text, but like the music changes, and then at this point the pogromists come and do it, and then the soldiers come and they steal stuff from it's not a concerto just as a concerto that's called the Kiev pogrom, but it kind of goes through the story as a thing. Okay, so to end, let's go to Makonovetsky's final comment, which I think it's important for the context. So he says, now I finished my writing out the music for you, and so he talks to Bergovsky here, and if you are satisfied with it, write to me so that I can send you more. I would have sent you the old transcriptions, but they are very torn, a lot is missing, and you would not be able to get anything out of it. So and then one of our favorite quotes, because of the bandit times, which you may refer to the Civil War, we don't know, they lay where they were, or everywhere you can imagine, in the dirt and in water and snow, and they got all turned. They suffered from the bandits and the mice and the moths, and all in those lamentable times. So I have to write them out because I remember them from having played them. So he actually wrote all these many pages of music out from memory, basically. But not in black ink, although actually it is mostly blackish ink, so I don't know, because he doesn't have any. So yeah, this is quite interesting. So here you see that he really wanted to preserve this, and it also gives us some idea of what the situation was in the late 1930s when he actually wrote that. So yeah, I think in the interest of time, I will just turn it over to Reuven for the Russian bits and other riddles that we're still looking at.
Yeah. Okay, so I will share my screen.
Just by the way, while you're sharing, Reuven, I know that Hannah and Reuven, you've been working on these Yiddish pieces together, and with some other colleagues of ours. Chaya has been joining you, and I know that Daniel has had his hand in the translation as well. I just want to salute you and thank you and congratulate you on this tremendous work that you have pursued, really kind of under the radar for the last 2 years. It's really amazing, and really it just opens the door to these incredible insights that we can take into the next phase of the work. So
okay, so here we are. Okay, I wanted to call my presentation maybe difficulties, oddities, and puzzles, but then I omitted the word difficulties. But still there are some, and there are many reasons for the difficulties, because not just Makonovetsky, of course, because I think his corpus of notes is the biggest, but other authors of the manuscripts, they have quite a creative spelling in their notes and names, and not only that, but also all these texts, they happen in the manuscripts in different languages and in different scripts. I mean, one of the first pages that we see has names written in Latin, but not just Latin, but in Deutsche Kurrenschrift. And it was not easy to decipher these names. You can't guess from English that this letter is actually S, and this squiggle is actually E or E, whatever you call it. So that was not easy to find out that this is S A peril and this is B M rider, but this was easier because there was also on the same page that name was in Russian, so that helps to decipher other letters in the first.
Was it Jutta Bogan who helped to discover this, or do you remember who found that?
She asked that, and then somebody, I'm not sure it was her or maybe somebody else, who actually pointed us to this handwritten.
Yeah, Eve was also somewhat involved with this. I don't remember exactly, but there was some email. This was at the very beginning. There was some email.
Yes, it was in the right after the first big deal, I think. Yeah, so that was one of things. There were. What else? We just mentioned that it's not easy to give a name to the tune, and whatever Bergovsky put in his final collection, how he named the tunes, that was up to him to decide. I'm not sure. So we have the scans of his catalog. Is Makonovetsky also there or not? No, so it's not. So then this fine example, which has how many different tune names in the title. So in Yiddish it has Dose Heiliger Freilichs. So in Yiddish it's just Freilichs. In Russian it is Еврейская Святая Hopka, Heiliger Skochna, Freilichs, Karahot. So 4.
This is what we refer to as a fuzzy genre.
Yes.
We call this a very fuzzy genre. Description. Zev, when you're typing, can you please
sorry.
You really, sorry, I don't mean to be a jerk about it, but keep typing. We want to hear what you say, but you gotta mute yourself.
He does that a lot, especially with Ochner, because he often says Ochner in Russian, but then usually it's Freilachs in Yiddish. That it's Ochner. Makonovetsky sometimes says Ochner in Yiddish, but very, very few times. Most of the time he just says it in Russian and says Freilachs or Karahot, something else in Yiddish. So there's this level of distinction like that. I think he has different categories in different languages in his head, and this is also part of how that happens.
Well, I think it's very helpful. I mean, it's incredibly helpful for us to sort of kind of use these sort of overlapping categories, like to say, this is a holy hopka. I also just sort of love the idea of a holy hopka, just because it sounds fun. But like, you know, to have this sort of thing that says it's a freilachs, a karachod, and it has the quality of being a skochna, you know, and that's for listening, it's not for dancing. I mean, just seeing how people describe these tunes, even though it is very confusing, is actually quite useful, because it just tells us that there is no fixed terminology, and that sometimes terminology has to be agglomerative to convey some kind of a meaning.
Yeah, so my point is, how will it translate to our project? Because we somehow need to mark the tunes by their names, styles. I don't know.
So the plan, okay, so here's the short version of where we're at right now. Here's the short version. The short version is that we read an article by a guy named Egil Baka, and it's about typologies and genre and things. And what he says is that basically you make typologies depending to describe a particular thing. And and it's not not everything that you describe in your typology will have, of the characteristics that you described for your typology, not every member of that typology will have every single quality, but it will generally fit into a category. And that it's and this idea comes from archaeology, like that archaeologists have been using these principles to describe archaeological finds for many years. And then he says, basically, you can have layers of typology. You can have overlapping layers, like, so in a way that you can describe. So we can, and by looking at the ways that these typologies and these categories overlap, that's how we derive a meaning for this thing. And the big outcome is that you don't have to pick just one, right? You don't have to pick just one of these words in order to describe this thing. In our archive, we might say that the dance rhythm is Freilachs, but it might also have the category for listening, right? There may be a two-part typology for dancing, for listening. We might have this is the Beregovsky category for dancing, for listening. And now, since we know that we have a text that says this is for listening, it's going to go into that Beregovsky category of for listening. It's going to have the dance tempo, or a dance genre or texture of Freilachs, but it will also have associated with it Karahod and Hopka somehow, and Skochna. Is it a Skochna? Yes, that's a category. So this is fuzzy. Things are fuzzy, but that's kind of how we're thinking about being additive and agglomerative rather than being limiting to only one designation. Go ahead, Zev. You have to unmute yourself, hon. You can unmute yourself. Go to your bottom left of your screen. There should be a microphone.
Thank you. There I see my microphone. Very good. Okay. I would like to stay much longer, but I can't. I'd like to hear more of what Reuven has to say. But what I just want to point out is that, of course, for our purposes in cataloging, we have to find a means. But in terms of the culture we're talking about, of East European Jewish dance culture, this is not at all surprising. And in the Jewish dance culture, the distinction between dance and non-dance was rather fluid. And Skochna often was used for this thing in between. I'd note that in other, say in Chabad, in Hasidic terminology, the Chabadniks have another term for Skochna, which does not appear here, which is Nigune Hisvadus, which is a Skochna. And here, Makonovetsky is covering all his bases. He knows that the Litvaks call this common Jewish dance a karachod or a hopke. And his people in Ukraine call it a Freilachs. But he knows.
This isn't Makonovetsky, though. This is something else, right? Reuven, this is not in Makonovetsky. Oh, this is Mac
This is Makonovetsky.
Never mind, I take it back. Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's just covering all his bases because he knows the Litvaks have other terms, but he's talking about the same thing. So it's not a question of fuzzy boundaries. It's not fuzzy. It's one thing, but he knows that the Yiddish speakers elsewhere use another term. To make life complicated outside of the Russian, again, he's talking within the Russian Empire, right? If he were to go outside the Russian Empire into Austria and Galicia, he would discover that the Jews call the Freilachs a chosidl. They don't have another word for a holy, for a holy Jewish dance. But okay, so we don't see chosidl here. But again, the point is that, sorry for the noise. The Jewish dance culture within the core repertoire was fluid between listening and dancing, between a circle dance and a shining or a totally solo dance, between a more secular version or more religious type. And all these had to function. They weren't sharply differentiated by rhythm. They weren't sharply differentiated by mode. There were other factors that there were, let's say, allusions within the melodies that would tell the Jews what was what was being alluded to and what was relevant in general. And beyond that, of course, there was a difference between North and South. And Makonovetsky is not interested in that. I mean, he knows the Litvak Hopka is actually, if you played a Litvak Hopka for a wedding in Ukraine, most of the people wouldn't be very happy. Okay, so there was a difference in style.
Dev, we don't have any evidence about, we don't really have much evidence about where the ambit of where he performed. We know that he's located, he's near Chernobyl, you know, is where
this Habne, where he was from, it's actually border between almost on the border between Ukraine and Belarus.
So why not? So of course,
Yeah,
so he's aware of the northern.
It's a middle area between north and south, I would say. So
exactly. So he's so he's covering all his bases for the core Jewish dance.
Still interesting that he does it only in Russian, and in Yiddish he just gives Frelach.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So go on. My short comment, then I'll have to go soon.
Okay.
Okay. I mute.
Another thing. Yeah. Sometimes he gives more elaborate name in the Russian. Title also is here at Atansa Chosid Aferstellernish. But here he gives Sandagirskaya Hopka Husid. So there was how we translated it in, it was a presentation, but I just looked into the dictionary. It maybe I dress up a disguise, because below under this tune he gives the description. One puts on a long payas with a belt and a stick with a hunch and an old coat and dance exactly this dance at a Jewish theater at the wedding. He entertains, brings joy to the bride and groom. My other point here about his creative spelling, it was not easy to decide what this means. We said that it's a theater, probably, even though it's spelled a theater. On the other side, he seems sometimes quite correctly spelling out the phrases in Hebrew, like Mesameh Chosen Vekala, or what was in Hans' presentation, Ketzad Merakdim Lifnei Akala, but not always. And sometimes with this, where was a paroiches, interesting, he tried to spell it in Hebrew. And I think somebody, I just noticed when I looked closer to Hannah's slide, that there was when he tries to, in parentheses, he tries to spell it in Hebrew, but instead of Sav, the last letter, he puts Samech. And somebody tries to correct it back to Sav with a pencil. And then right next to it, he transliterates this word in Yiddish. So it says paroiches, how it would be written in Yiddish, probably. Yeah. So that's the thing. Also, yeah, if I may ask Hannah to put back the page 19 and page 11 actually in her presentation. I'll stop share for a moment.
Sure. This one? No.
Yes.
But,
No, page 11.
yeah, I don't know why it's jumped now. Here. This one?
So yes, the last screenshot, it has a few words. For example, vivat. It's sometimes written with dalet and sometimes written with tav, with tes, vivad or vivat. And also this has an example, as I say, sometimes he puts correct Hebrew spelling for phrases like Mesameh Chosen Vekala or Ketzad Meragdim, but from the word Rash, which in Hebrew means noise, he spells like Rash would be transliterated in Yiddish. Reish Aleph Aleph Shin. And also it's quite common with him, and we'll see probably I will ask for another title slide. It's also there's such thing as in America what they call Yinglish, when usually introduced more and more English words into Yiddish until they're just only prepositions and maybe some words remain. So, or you could actually somehow create Yiddish word from was another language. But here again, here the last word is tremolin. So you, it's nice verb to play tremolo in just with one word in Yiddish. And another, yeah, can you just move to slide number 20, page 24 about the Kiever pogrom?
This one?
Yes, there was the last phrase. The arrested robbers are led to get punished. So in this some of the words are understood for non-Russian speaker, but not all of them. So I don't know how much are they really Yiddish, so to say. The arrestirte, maybe it's
I
quite.
think arrestierte is fine, but
It's fine.
the last two is I wouldn't have understood it at all if you
Yeah,
hadn't explained it.
yeah. So yeah, grabitl is the robber in Russian, and to punish somebody is naказывать. So here, so Yiddishized Russian or vice versa. Okay. Another. Oops. So yeah, I'm.
You want to share? Shall I stop? Okay.
Yeah, I'll get back to screen sharing. So. So yeah, there are other notes that not really related to the music, and some of the pages they have like exercises in calligraphy, and usually some Russian notes they're written in very fine script, I would say. This is what says: из города Кременца Бенцион скрипач, приятное до свидания. It doesn't, as far as I see, it has nothing to do with the music on that page. It says from the town of Kremenets, Benson Skripach. Again, I don't know what this may mean. Is it his last name, Skripach, or it was his, they called him Skripach, which means the fiddler. And Приятное до свидания is just pleasant farewell. Should be, how is it connected to the music on that page? I don't know. Yeah, so these are some oddities, and here are some puzzles. The first one was solved by Shalpert. So that was for some time not intelligible, but until I think what's his name? Yeah, the accordionist was Harold
Paddy?
Petty, yeah, he put the note in the translation request for this entry, and it's that this says Nigan Mitolna. The other one, I think Eleanor put this note, and also it stayed unresolved for a long time. She thinks this may be an optailn, but
no, I don't. Doesn't really.
so it says optalion, actually, but again, it was sometimes we see that the letters are switched in the handwritten words.
But also it looks like quite, is it just, I mean, we would have to look at the full page, but is it just underlined, or is it quite clearly like a passive and not a comments here on the first
No,
one?
I think it's either part of the fermata or something. It's
so
not.
it's not part of the word. Right?
It's not not part of the word.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in this one we would have to look at the
And
context again.
here's the last page, I think, for my presentation. And the first on this page is good news for Dan. Actually, he asked it a long time ago in the translation requests, and I had my insight just last night when I looked at it. And I think it means Ein Kitzva. It's written on the side of the page, so you need to either rotate the page or tilt your head to read it down. And yeah, it was I think that's what it means. Now yeah, and last thing, even though this is written in Cyrillic and probably it's a Russian word, but I still don't have the slightest idea what it may be. So we still have some riddles and puzzles to solve. And yeah, I don't know, probably everybody who's present right now, they already know about this translation wish list. And yep, you're welcome to put your entries and we'll try to look at them. Not guaranteed that they are resolved. Yep. I'm finished as of now. Sorry. Any questions?
The fact that you are able to get meaning out of the squiggles and, like, I mean, the level of abstraction of seeing Russian written in Yiddish, oisius, and Hebrew spelt in Yiddish. I mean, it's a lot. And what you are able to derive from that is absolutely incredible. I just in real time was writing to Biana, and I got a response from her. So hopefully we'll carry on some more conversation. And I think it really was the day of the invasion last year that we were corresponding. So no surprise why we didn't follow up. But now we're. I mean, this work is so incredible, and it's exciting to start to be able to put performance of the melodies together with the text. That's going to be very exciting for all of us, I think. So, anybody else?
Folks, I got to go, but it's wonderful to see you all, and you're doing fantastic work. Really, it's amazing. It has to be seen to be believed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So looking forward to the next time.
Bye, Zev.
Sure.
And, since we're so happy to have this NEH Scholarly Editions Award to plan the critical edition series, the work that you have done to work on this text already is going to inform our process of setting our editorial policies. And of course, you are so deeply involved that we want to continue to take honor, to do what we can to be respectful of the work that you've done and include you in our teamwork to try to figure out how we're going to present this magnificent material to the world. And not to mention Dan Karkner, I know that you've been working on doing the musical notation of all of the big showpieces from Pedutzer. That is also a labor of deep love and attention to sort of work your way through these big, giant, long form pieces. And so we're just really excited that we have the opportunity to take all of this work into its next phase and to start figuring out how we're going to take it from our inside group, from our small group of dedicated volunteers and all of the volunteers in the project who have contributed, and to sort of really now be working in a presentational way so that we can share this music to all of those classical violinists out there who don't know yet how much they love the works of Pedutzer, and they don't know how much
Here,
they
here.
love the works of Makonovetsky for violin. So
Great, great. Wonderful. Okay, onward and upward.